All right. So I think we are live, and unless the CFF team comes in and sets us up for an introduction, I think that we're ready to get started with today's session, with the session this hour. And what we're going to be talking about during this hour is actually two stories combined. As you may have seen on the schedule, in some of the schedules, it points out that this is um, an Arkansas story. This is about talent. And another part that you may see is that this is actually also about a study that our team has done regarding the cyber state of the states. And you'll see how we're going to weave these two stories together, because um, the way that we contribute on our team to the cyber community has a lot to do with our approach to talent and our approach to what we prioritize for our people to do and what we prioritize for our automation and artificial intelligence to do. And so the way that we'll format this session is I'll do some quick waving introductions for the other faces you see here today. And we're going to first present the way that who we are and the way that we see the security of state governments here in the United States. And then we're going to talk with Sarah Poulton, who's on our team and is with us here today. And we're going to hear her story about translating what she's learned in her previous experience and now porting that over into technology talent. And I think you're really going to enjoy her story, and we certainly do. And you are going to see how this all ties together. So with us today here on the BreachBits team, my name is Foster Davis. I am co-founder here at BreachBits. We also have our CEO and co-founder, John Lundgren, is on the line here. Hey, John, how are you? And we also, of course, have Sarah Poulton, as I mentioned, and she is with our user experience, customer experience, software development team. And so I will roll right into how we're going to talk about today. If you've got questions, you can put them in the chat, and we will address those at the end for both topics here. And we will take about 20 minutes in this first part, about 15 to 20 minutes with Sarah. We'll have about 10 or so minutes for questions if there are any at the end. And what you're going to see here are this core talent and innovation that we have, but let's structure it around a discussion about, hey, what does the security of our public space here in the United States, what does that look like? And one way to look at this is through each of the state governments here in the country. And so we are engaged presently with a study of the all 50 states and territories and select cities. And what we're going to give you to start here at the beginning is a progress report. So we've got about 10 states that we have fully analyzed, and we've got 40 to go, along with a couple territories. And so the gist here and the infographic on the right, you're gonna see our sort of executive summary of what we see. John's going to come in about halfway through this talk, and he's going to talk to us about how important it is to understand the landscape. And along that way, we're going to give you some terminology. We know that we have in the audience, we have a mix of people that are very technical and those that aren't. So we'll level set on some of the terminology. We'll tell you about our methodology. You know, our job is to look at large groups and have an analysis of where their risk is. Can a hacker actually break in to this group or to this single entity? And so we'll tell you about our methodology, and you'll start to see during the methodology how we use people in order to execute that. John's going to take us through what the average state government looks like in terms of what we call attack surface. That's what hackers can see. And then John's going to take us through the most important part, really, when you're trying to figure out if somebody can break in. He's going to take us through what's called threat vectors. Threat vectors. This is the confluence or the coming together of both an opportunity and a capability for an attacker. And then we'll summarize, and then we're going to talk about, again, Sarah's story. And as we start into this, let me tell you a little bit about who we are and why we know what we're talking about. Our company, BreachBits, we are military cyber veterans, And our goal was to take something that's actually very human intensive and use automation and AI. And that thing is this idea of, some call it automated penetration testing, some people call it red teaming. Essentially, we are hackers, we're ethical hackers, and we know risk when we see it. Not only are we experienced at hacking, but we're experienced in the language of executive or enterprise risk management. Because when you talk talent, when you talk people, you have to be able to take technical ideas and deliver them in a way that people can understand and actually make decisions on. So this is what we do for a living, and I think you're going to enjoy some of the initial findings that we've found. Now, we could look at a lot of populations, and we do on a quarterly basis. Why are we focusing presently, among others? Why are we present focusing on state security? Clearly, state government security has a critical impact on everybody in the United States, and it could have to do with critical services. It could even do with commerce. But it's really important to look at each individual state because it sort of helps us characterize what the nation as a whole is going as. We're a nation of more than 50 parts, and so it's those together, and that's why this is important. And so our goal is to help the security community and the public sector understand state security challenges, because they're going to need to understand those challenges to know what should the workforce look like, what should the budget be to solve for it. We believe in putting the bottom line up front, and the graphic that you see here on the right, our assessment preliminarily of the first 10 states that we look at is that if you were to ask a hacker between 0 and 10, how easy or how risky are these states? What we're seeing here, what we're explaining here is that we rate that as a 6.1. A hacker would believe that that it's more easy than not to cause a cyber breach. John's gonna show us why and how we kind of come up with that score. But bottom line up front, we're saying that there are some significant issues that really should be addressed. And so we need to make sure we've got the talent to do that. So let's level set on a few terms here that we use. Even those in the security community kind of have different flavors of a lexicon. And here's how we talk about it. The first term is attack surface. So you can read the definition sort of as we've written it out here, but another way to think of that is, okay, if a hacker were to look at a given organization, this is the landscape, this is the geography, this is the ways at which the hacker could interact. The second is active hosts. What we mean by that are public-facing IP addresses that have services exposed to them or have an associated domain record. Another way to say that is an active host isn't just a computer that's sitting there, it's one that a hacker could actually interact with, usually via those services that are exposed by the nature of their purpose. The third term here, high-risk services. So if a service is a process running on a computer that's designed to accept and respond to requests, not all services are the same. And from the hacker's perspective, a high-risk service is one that allows for remote access or are usually highly targeted by attackers when they're exposed to the internet. And a great example that we've listed here is the remote desktop protocol. It doesn't always mean that that's going to cause a breach, but there are certain services that hackers are going to pay a lot of attention to because they are usually going to lead to something. The final one here, perhaps the most important, is threat vectors. Hackers really care about combining the opportunity to cause a breach with a capability that they have in order to actually practically cause a breach. There are theoretical vulnerabilities out there, but what we care about most is a threat vector, and that's when you pair the capability and the opportunity. Some of the types, the way we think of it, is in three categories. Some are due to a vulnerability. If any of you follow the National Vulnerability Database, these might be common vulnerabilities and exposures, CVEs. Others are misconfigurations. The computer is doing what it's supposed to. It's just that the technicians have told the computer to do something that's undesirable in the security realm. Credential has to do with passwords or other hashes, other ways of perhaps authentication, and ways to perhaps co-opt or steal some sort of a credential to then get what appears to the computer to be valid access. So with those terms level set, what's our method? How do we do this? How do we know what we're about to tell you about the states? Being that we're in progress here, what we start with is if a hacker only knew the name of a state and their official government website. That's where we start. This is called black box testing for those that are familiar with it. And we conduct the first couple stages of hacker reconnaissance. We use standardized scaled automation so that every time we look at it and we go through it, it is the same, which allows us to compare states. We're going to discover things like domains, network ranges, the enumerations of the public-facing attack surface only is where we're focusing in this study. And then we're going to analyze that attack surface looking for threat vectors. Everything we're doing is conducted passively and ethically. We don't cross that ethical threshold. We're not going to actually attempt to exploit or verify some of these vulnerabilities. We're not bringing in any dark web data in there, although most attackers would. And we're not going to take any additional infrastructure that from the state governments. Now, we're not doing that in this study, but these are things that we do as a matter of our business and certainly things that hackers do. So important to understand how we've done this, what we've limited ourselves to. So we're going to now bring in our CEO and co-founder, John Lundgren, who's going to help us understand some of what we found as we started to analyze the attack surface. John?
Thanks, Foster. So like Foster mentioned, we've looked at 10 of the 50 state governments from an attacker's lens. And from the infographic you can see on the right, that's kind of the summation of what we've found so far. But really our intention here is to not focus on any individual state or call out any individual state for how they look in cyberspace. It's really to get an idea of what the average state looks like to an attacker and what kind of challenges that they face on a daily basis in defending the networks that really provide a lot of value and services to all of us as citizens. So we found that the average state from our assessments has about a little over 60,000 public-facing IP addresses or Internet Protocol addresses that are associated with that state. So this can come from different registration information that are addresses that are registered to employees of that state or some agency of that state government. So not all 60,000 are actual hosts, in a live resources. From there, we take that 60,000 number and we go down. We found about almost 2,500 active hosts in the attack surface for the average state. So that's definitely a smaller subset of that big 60,000 number, but 2,500 active hosts that are facing the internet is still a really large attack surface compared to the average, even large enterprise or private business. From there, within those active hosts, we found nearly 3,000 discoverable subdomains that are associated with the average state, as well as about 3,100 public-facing exposed services. So, within those 2,500 active hosts, there are a little over 3,000 public-facing exposed services. So on average, each host has 1.2 or so exposed services that they have to manage. So if you think of that put yourself in a defender's standpoint at a state and local government, this is an enormous attack surface to try to manage, especially as Foster mentioned earlier, when the onus for defending all of this isn't limited to one centralized organization. This is spread out across many agencies, offices, and so coordinating how to defend all of this is, can be a real challenge for the average state. So some of the things as within that attack surface that catches our eye, of those roughly 3,000 exposed services, about 66 on average, for an average state of those are what we would consider high-risk services that Foster explained earlier. And we'll go into on a later slide which are the biggest offenders there. In addition, there are about 145 web authentication portals that the average state has. So these are 145 websites that each have some way to log in or authenticate, as well as 25, on average, 25 VPN endpoints and 10 mail servers. So, just the sheer expanse of that can really be a challenge to manage, especially across all these organizations. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Foster. So a few parts of analysis that we found during this study so far when it comes to attack surface. On average, the average state has about 82% of its attack surface is using infrastructure that is registered to the state. So meaning, it's not relying on cloud service providers or third parties. 82% are of that attack surface is based on infrastructure that are registered to that state or some agency within that state, which is very large compared to the most private enterprises that we see. What's also surprising, especially seeing the trend with cloud computing, with the average state government only has about 6% of its public-facing infrastructure that's cloud-based. So that's a tiny fraction of what most private industries, what we're seeing in most private industries. And then of the services that we've identified that are high risk, on average, this is what we see for the average state when it comes to high risk services. So roughly 30 secure shell or SSH services. You can see down the list, the average state has about 6 exposed databases to attackers and to the internet, which is fairly high. 4, Foster mentioned remote desktop protocol earlier. The average state has about 4 exposures of remote desktop protocol, and you can see the others on the list here. So that's really kind of a snapshot of what the attack surface looks like for the average state in our nation today. So we look at attack surface mainly as context to be able to focus on the most important thing from our standpoint, which is where are the threat vectors, where are the opportunities that an attacker has a place that they can aim their capabilities and a capability to exploit them. So we found the average state has about 282 threat vectors. So if you ask an attacker where are all the places they could break into the average state has about 282 options. So the overwhelming majority of those are credential based, so about 82%. So I know vulnerabilities, misconfigurations get a lot of the press and the news, but it's even more important to focus on all the places where users and citizens can log in, because each of those are opportunities that could be exploited by attackers as well. About 18% are vulnerability or misconfiguration based, and 13% of the threat vectors are ones that we see a lot of attention by ransomware actors. And we've taken some of this data and compared it with some other details about the state, such as population, GDP, things like that. And Foster's going to go through some of the correlations or not correlations that we've seen. Foster.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. So when we look at the data, there's 2 interesting slides that I want to show you here. The first is when you look at the number of IP addresses that we find in the first 10 states, and for each state there, and then you compare that to the population of that state. What we find in the top left here, you see on the y-axis IP addresses found, and on the x-axis the population. And you see that we see a very low to no apparent correlation. What that might suggest is that as the size of a state gets larger, we don't see any any increase necessarily in the attack surface and how large the surface actually is. The big states have large and small attack surfaces. Small states have big and small attack surfaces. Now, we see a similar lack of a trend when it comes to comparing the IP addresses to state gross domestic product. Those with a large GDP, some have large and some have small amounts of IP addresses, and the same for small. So that's an interesting sort of lack of a trend. Anytime you can find sort of a lack of a trend, that's just as interesting as perhaps the next slide is, well, where are we seeing some trends? So what we did, remember, John was pointing out that it really doesn't come down to, well, how many IP addresses are there? It really comes down to, well, how many ways could an attacker actually have an option to attack? Threat vectors. So now as in these first 10 states, what we're finding is that there appears to be a very strong correlation between threat vectors and population and threat vectors and GDP. So as the population of the state increases, there may be a correlating increase in the number of threat vectors. As GDP rises, we're noticing that it may be that the viable threat vectors are also rising. So that we're going to keep our eye out on trends like this as we complete the study and look deeper for these mathematical statistical relationships that could give us an insight on the nature of the threat. And if you understand the nature of the threat, that helps you better understand the nature of the talent we need to address the threat. So with this study specifically, the next steps that we take, as we mentioned, we're going to include all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. We will also include similar assessments of cities, municipalities, counties, perhaps in future studies or in this study as we conclude the final scoping of this. We will, of course, continue our routine coordination with the states themselves and with the relevant stakeholders. That's sort of what our next path. If we were giving you a progress report on that now, this is the next steps until we conclude and then beyond. Some of the large takeaways during this portion of the talk, what we wanted to paint for you is, again, some of the nature of the challenge. And I think that 3 points that you would have seen is that there is an extremely large, diverse, and fluid attack surface. There's a lot of dynamism. That in and of itself is a challenge. And so how can our workforce manage that? How can our public sector workforce manage that? And then also the managing the between the dozens of agencies, departments, it's incredible. And remember, we didn't even include the other elements of their IT and operational technology that we know is there. And so even with these fully large and fully trained security teams, managing the exposure of that can be very difficult. Our goal is to make sure that we look at this carefully because the states are very important to all of us. And you heard John mention a couple of times, our assessment here is that the risk is significantly higher on average than most companies we see in the private sector. So that as a comparison is something that we should be concerned about because it is so important. We will be releasing this report, as we mentioned, directly with the state governments and working with their officials, but also to the general public. We also, for example, are doing this with the oil and gas industry, and we do this each quarter for a different sector. And this helps us understand the nature of the problem, nature of the challenge in each of them. Now, as we transition to the next part of our talk today, think about the nature of this challenge. And as we hear Sarah tell us about how she made a transition, how she has come to be where she is on our team, think about the challenge, and then also think about when we mentioned the way that our team approaches our part of the challenge. You'll remember that I mentioned things like automation, artificial intelligence. That's one way that we address the enormous complexity of the attack surface. And so if there are any other follow-on questions on this portion of it, you can always reach out to me or to John. But let's get into what Sarah's going to tell us in this part of the journey. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Foster. And thanks everyone for joining us today. So my name is Sarah. And so big kind of segue into this next section. I'm going to be speaking from my perspective and my experience as a person who does not have a tech background, who is currently working in the technology and security sector. So I will tell you more about that journey. It's kind of that what this is going to be about. But just this is about me. So it is kind of a big change, just so you aren't too shocked by the next part. So my first slide is actually a little redundant. If you'll go ahead and switch sides. Oh, well, this slide is fine. So this is me. So I am currently working as a front-end software developer. I focus on UI and UX. And I'm really at all parts of that software development lifecycle, working on ideas in ideation, design, development, implementation. I get to do a little bit of all of it, with also a focus on customer experience. So a really technical job that is also based largely in a long career history working in customer service. So where I'm at currently, with the next slide, this is what is redundant. I'm currently working with BreachBits. You just got, if you were here for the first part, you got a great overview of what they're doing. I won't spend too much time talking about it. And I think something that you'll be seeing, as this week goes on and people are talking about cybersecurity and the talent needed for it, you're going to see that cybersecurity is this intersection of technical talent and business needs. So I think it makes for a really unique opportunity for non-traditional people to get into, right? For taking other experiences into these other realms and having a place in cybersecurity because of that. So I won't talk too much about that either. But for me, getting into this new career started let me set the scene, right? So it was spring of 2020 when I think a lot of things changed for a lot of people. I had been working in a small business that actually made chocolate. I had started with them a few years beforehand, actually making chocolate, which not another thing I never expected to do with my life. And I worked my way up to a position in upper management with them. We were on this huge growth path. We were about to enter into all these new markets. I had all these events planned for the year. The stage was really set for that job to kind of, and that company to explode in a really big way. And instead we got COVID. And that really changed what was happening for that business and for everyone. So that meant in May of 2020, I was actually unemployed and I had a 1-year-old daughter. So it was a really terrifying experience. I think that a lot of people, here today and all over the world probably understand. But I had no idea what I was going to do. And so May of 2020, looking around, and I really totally lost because how do you go from feeling really secure in your job and this like great growing position, and then it feels like you have no opportunities. Fast forward to August of 2021, and I am accepting my first job as a software developer. And so really whirlwind year and a half experience that took me from absolutely zero coding experience to actually getting paid to do it. So Foster, if you'll change the slide for me. So I'm going to start further back now and talk about my experience that actually led me to that precipice of spring 2020 and then the change into my technical career. So I started working. I have a varied career history. I started working as a teenager, working both as a tutor and as a waitress. And I would continue doing that throughout high school. And then I would continue serving and bartending throughout college. So I was attending a small liberal arts college. I was actually doing my degree in English and creative writing. I studied a lot of poetry, which is people are always like, then why are you doing this now? And I have a lot of thoughts on that. I actually don't think they're that dissimilar. Things about patterns and about looking at things really closely and making things that feel good. I think it's all very relevant. But the picture is just, that's me and my daughter. I paid for these pictures, and so I will show them to everyone at any opportunity. So she's also kind of the reason that I do a lot of this. So I thought she needed to be in there as well. All right, if you'll switch the slide. So when I graduated college, I didn't know what I was going to do either because I followed my heart. And like I said, I studied poetry. Poetry, though not like a really solid career path with what you do when you just really love poetry. And so I did a lot of different things after college, continued bartending. I got into event management and coordination. And I did that on weekends. I worked as a retail manager. I got into teaching because that was kind of, everyone's like, that's what you do. I spent some time working with the Oxford American Magazine, which is a great magazine that's actually based here in Arkansas. That was a really great experience. It was a great opportunity, but wasn't something that I was going to be able to pursue long term. So here's just like a couple facts about me. So this is me at my first beer tending job. I worked in craft beer for a number of years. I worked as an editorial assistant, like I said. I worked multiple jobs at a time while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and was dabbling in a little bit of everything. So here's just a couple of fun facts from those. So 2016, I was the Oxford American editorial assistant, or a editorial assistant. I worked 3 jobs at the same time in the year 2017. So that included bartending and then sales at a brewery locally in here in Arkansas. I was substitute teaching during the day, and then on the weekends I was doing bartending and catering for a wedding venue. So it was I don't actually really remember that year. It was just a lot of the same thing. So 120, that is the number of pints in a half barrel of beer. It's just a fun fact for you. I rolled a lot of those kegs around, put them on a lot of dollies, put them into a lot of trucks. Unloaded them all over the place. And 0 is the amount of chocolate making experience I had pre-2018. And then I would spend quite a bit of time actually making chocolate, as well as doing education and events around it, doing dessert pairings, doing consumer education, doing employee trainings, and lots of other things. So I had my hand in a lot of various industries, but for the most part, it was a lot of small businesses. It was a lot of niche businesses also, working in craft beer, working in chocolate, working for literary magazines, working in education. These are all things that, presented particular problems, especially in communication, and getting what, we in the back lines needed to tell people on the front lines. So there was always often a disconnect. And so that was a big part of what I did in a lot of these places, was actually creating that story about, like, with beer, it was like, why is this beer $5 when my Bud Light's $1? Or, what's the difference in the process that makes it taste different? And like, what are the different kinds of beer? And with chocolate, it's a lot of the same things. Like, if you're selling a $9 chocolate bar, you gotta have a great story, right? Because you can go buy a Hershey's for 99 cents. And so a lot of what I did was that customer experience in that way. Right. And none of this stuff is coding. So the next part of what I'm going to talk about is how I actually got into software development. A lot of the resources, I'm going to try to be really practical and pragmatic with what I talk about, so that people can see how you go from 0 to employed because I think that's probably what a lot of people are looking for here. So the only thing I can really speak to is my path as a software developer in which is not like 100, it's not quite cybersecurity. And there are also lots of roles within different tech companies that aren't going to be web development, that aren't going to be software development, that aren't going to be the same kind of process to get there. So that's just the disclaimer. There are lots of other opportunities out there that maybe fit your particular set of skills and your particular history even better. And I'm just not able to speak to all of those things, unfortunately. If you'll go ahead and change the slide. So like I said, in spring of 2020, I was unemployed with a small child and just really had no idea what I was going to do next. And that was the trend for several months. I was at first really excited I wasn't really excited. That's not entirely true. I decided to look at it as an opportunity to spend some time with my daughter, and that was really nice. But it quickly became apparent that we needed to be doing something else. And I wasn't thriving as a stay-at-home mom. And so I really started looking for some other opportunities. As it might strike you, having studied poetry in college, I'm not sure I really went near a computer for anything other than an internet machine or a word processor. And I came from a background where my school didn't have any kind of technology programs, didn't really have computer science courses, didn't have anything like that, which is a reflection of opportunity and not a reflection of my age, because I think by the time I was coming up in high school, they really should have. So for me, getting into software development literally never would have happened. It would not have crossed my mind except for Instagram. So I actually had a friend who posted about a program that was coming to Northwest Arkansas. And I remember very vividly, they posted about it. I saw the post. I was like, it's a free program. You learn web development, and, it doesn't cost. And I wasn't doing anything else. So I saw the post. I literally got on my computer, applied for the program. And then I close the application and I go to Google and I Google, what does a full stack developer do? Because I was deeply unaware of what I was getting myself into. Yeah. So, so that's how it all got started. So I got into the program. So Launch Code is the boot camp that I took. It was a 6-month part-time boot camp. Part-time, I want to use in quotes. That just means that it wasn't 9 to 5, because it was really aimed at people who were working other jobs and hoping to get their first break into these kinds of roles. So Launch Code is based out of St. Louis. They are a nonprofit that is engaged in bringing talented and diverse workforce development. They started in St. Louis. They have a couple of other places now. They are not usually in Arkansas. The Walton Family Foundation here in Arkansas, our local billionaires actually brought them in, and the program was totally free, and it was a life-changing experience. I don't really know how else to say that. So that is actually where I got the foundation that would help me get a job later on. Things I'd really like to point out about Launch Code are that it was a virtual program. It relied on a lot of part-time work from a lot of different people, and that it was free. Did I say that already? Because I think that's really important. It was a completely free program. There are free boot camps out there that are going to be available to you. Launch Code in Northwest Arkansas, like I said, got their money through grants from the Walton Family Foundation, but when they operate in Philadelphia, Kansas City, and St. Louis, where they're also based, they're still free, and they're getting grants from other places. And so it's always, those opportunities are out there. I did have the opportunity after I finished going through my boot camp. I actually did come back as a TA and had the opportunity to teach in the program as well, which was a great way to solidify my own understanding and to feel like I got to give back to people who gave me a whole lot. If you'll go on to the next slide, another really important resource that I was able to use in my time was the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences. So, of course, if you're outside of Arkansas, this isn't the same kind of resource that might be available, the exact resource that would be available to you, but there are going to be resources like this available to you. The Arkansas Center for Data Sciences is a nonprofit organization operating in Arkansas to connect non-traditional people like myself with talented businesses like BreachBits. So it was actually through the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences that I first became aware of BreachBits, and BreachBits became aware of me. And so in addition to that those job placement services, they also they do interview prep, they do resume prep, and they actually do provide training as well. So this was an initiative started 2 or 3 years ago here in Arkansas, but there are things like this popping up all over the place. I see my time is, I've got a lot more things to talk about, so I want to move along. If you'll go to the next slide, I'll have opportunity to talk about more of that. Free or close to free resources. There are a lot of things out there that you can pay for, and it might become the point that you need to, because those things are valuable. But I cannot stress enough how much you can learn without having to pay anything. So I've presented a couple of things up here. I can talk about a little, once again, these are all also focused on software and web development. So if you're looking to gain skills and other things, there are a ton of other resources. One thing I really want to point out is social networks. I have gotten a lot of opportunities or found out about a lot of opportunities through social networks. For me, that means Twitter, Discord, Slack, and even Facebook. Where I'm involved in either local or national developer groups. And so finding those can be a little hard. Finding the ones that are the right fit for you can be a little hard, but it's definitely worth looking for them. So for me, that includes I'm in a local group of Arkansas developers. I find a ton of great resources and support there. And it was also a great resource when I was looking for a job. Some of these other options are particular voices in the space that I think are worth listening to, because there are a lot of options, and so hopefully you can find the ones that work for you. James Q. Quick was actually my instructor during my boot camp, and he provides a lot of free content on YouTube, and it's really full stack. Back and front end, all the works that he will cover. He focuses a lot on JavaScript, and he's just I loved working with him, and I think he did a great job. I just want to shout him out. Colt Steele does have some free content. He also has some paid courses on Udemy. The full stack web development one that he does on Udemy, I think he updates it every few years. Taught me a lot of things that gave me some in-depth knowledge on some of the things we covered really quickly in my boot camp. So it was a great addition to have in my tool belt. Angie Jones, you can find her on Twitter and find some of the things she does. She talks a lot about testing, which is often one of those things that we all think it's a really good idea, and then it doesn't happen quite as much as it should. Sarah Drasner she works with one of the big tech companies, and it eludes me right now, but she talks a lot about design for developers and that intersection in which you can be both, right? Where you can design something that looks really good and then go and make it, rather than having that be a two-person team of someone who just designs or someone who just develops, and how you can kind of do both. Danny Thompson was also, he was one of my TAs during my boot camp. You can find him on LinkedIn, and he is a huge advocate for getting non-traditional people into tech. Danny, prior to becoming a software developer, fried chicken in gas stations. And took the Launch Code Bootcamp, and was as last I heard, was working at Google. So lots of opportunities for all of us out there. I'm happy to talk more about these opportunities, that these available resources, but I'll go ahead and to go on as well. If you'll change the slide. Reach out to me if you have any questions. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Twitter. I always say that I'm going to talk more about tech on Twitter. That might not happen. You might hear about my feelings about kids animated TV shows instead. But it's always a great place to connect. I think that's time for me. So I'll wrap it up there and see if you have any questions.
And as I'm sure that as we move into questions, you all can see certainly why we're very proud of Sarah's story and why we are very proud that her story is a part of our story. And it isn't exclusively an Arkansas story. Our company is based in DC, but to me, it's a representative of the Heartland Center, the Heartland story. We see talent in the Heartland as we blend business and technology, as Sarah points out, and we are looking to reproduce desperately, because people like Sarah have brought so much to our team, and so our goal in the short term is to see how many more Sarahs we can get in the workforce. And so this concludes the structured part, and we are happy to take any questions or discuss other comments. And I see Val.
This is fantastic, and thank you, Sarah, for this for the story, sharing the story with us. As much as it is personal, I think it's become kind of the underpinning and probably the poster child for what we are trying to do at CFF, and what we discussed with Foster and John in the broader scheme of things. I am so glad we could hear your story, and congratulations for making it this far. I'm sure there is a long way ahead for you and for your child. I think there is a bright future, and I always talk about cybersecurity industry has the opportunity to change lives, to provide durable career opportunities, and it's just identifying more more Sarahs who are hidden gems and talent, and have the motivation and are self-starters and are willing to give it all, and bring a diversity of thought and like experience that this industry so much needs. We are a bunch of geeks and nerds, which is very true, and we are proud of that. But we need the creativity, we need the experience, we need the self-instilled discipline to be successful here. This is an industry of self-starters and will remain so, and that's the only way we can defend ourselves in the digital frontier. So thank you for being part of this industry and the family that we call CFF, and those friends that are around us. So I don't know, this just warms my heart to hear this. And by no means Foster and John, the first part was absolutely amazing. I think we are on the right track of delivering the cyber state of states the way we are looking to. And the 10 states, I'm sure, will go expand to the 50, and then North America, and then global. I think it's a great initiative. It will definitely shed a light on the areas that need attention, to be brutally true to ourselves, right? So that we can defend the infrastructure that we use every day and take for granted. So thank you again. I think there'll be a lot of collaboration or collaborative actions going forward from here. This session by itself, then collectively the sessions through the day, and that upcoming tomorrow, and the roundtable, and the DC session. So I'm looking forward to all of that, but particularly greatly inspired by this session. So thank you. We'll quickly switch over to the next and just wrap up the day. And I'm looking forward to the shortly coming after, probably next week, we engage with you on all the other friends that we're working together. So thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Foster. Thank you, John. Take care. And
Sounds great. See you later this week.